If you were hoping for big volatility today, hoping Powell would choose violence, well, you were probably let down. But don't worry. If you wanted to know what volatility might look like, we have ways to make it up. A drop in gold price, like we saw this week, is always going to raise the question, how far could it go? Same with a spike. We're seeing a little bit of that today, so how high can gold go? Well, the mistake there is thinking of a breakout as the trend, when what we're actually seeing is just volatility. Thursday, a really good example, we saw prices pull back, but that definitely is not the trend for the year. We weren't witnessing the start of a turnaround. The week leading up to that pullback, that can't really be extrapolated either. We probably need to just zoom out. The trend over the past decade shows 7.5% average annual appreciation for gold, and that's a little bit more informative than what's been happening over the past few months. And what volatility does do is give us some quick excitement. We get to pat ourselves on the back, and the spikes, we get in some discount buys on the dips. But man, it can really screw you up if you take a look at those moves and try to extrapolate them out, thinking that's what's coming ahead. If we want a sense for what gold might do, it makes a lot more sense to look at historical performance and try to lay that over current nominal price movement. I'm not sure it's completely logical to do this since we'll never see an exact replay of history. It kind of gives the Heraclitus vibe there. No man ever steps in the same river twice. It's not the same river and he's not the same man. But it works as a good example, and this isn't a new idea. There are all kinds of people on YouTube doing this with best case scenarios. We hear that all the time. Here's where gold or silver are going based on some past reference point. Well, we get a lot of people in the comments here nervous about the worst case scenario. So we're going to play that out. Now, if we want an extreme case to visualize what kind of crazy things could happen, we're going to look at the time period from 2011 to now. We're going to bring that performance forward. Now, this is actually a fun and interesting case because we get some familiar moves, but we also get to see how bananas things could go. That's the part that people are afraid of. So maybe we can visualize worst case scenarios like the Stoics told us to do and then see how it actually works out in the end. Okay, so we're backing up just before 2011's all-time high at the beginning of the year. We're going to line that up with the day, and that gives us $2,842 as a short-term top. That's pretty specific, right? Well, in 2011, the nominal high was $1,825. The price of gold ran from $1,325 at the start of the year to $1,825 by July. It's a 38% gain. And we're seeing a run this year, but just to line things up, coming into 2024, gold price was $2,060. If we applied the 38% gain that we saw in 2011, that would put the spot price of gold at $2,842. That would be our imaginary top for 2024. And let's say it hits in October to give the Fed their chance to work in this rate cut that Powell is just finally kind of admitting to. So $2,840 sounds pretty good. Now, why not $3,000? Well, again, we're just taking a prior case from 2011 and acting like it's happening today, 2024, and we're going to let it play out. That's going to give us a sense for what happened in the past, but we're going to use today's numbers. That's going to allow us to line up our feelings with what's actually happening with this stuff today. So there you go. We still have $300 more to go before we see this imaginary short-term top. Now, the spike we saw in 2011 held pretty well for about 15 months. The nominal gold price in September of 2012 was $1,775-ish. So 3% drop from the $1,825 all-time high in 2011. So if we say our new made-up top comes in October of this year, 2024, drops 3% 15 months later, that means January of 2026, the price of gold would be $2,757. This is where things get interesting because September of 2012, that's where things went bad for gold. Real bad. We saw prices crash all the way down to $1,060 by November of 2015, 3 years later. So another 40% drop. And if you like that Stoic philosophy of visualizing the worst that could happen, well, this one's for you. A 40% drop to the $2,757 that we just worked out would mean that we would see gold fall to $1,654 by February of 2029. So there's your crazy worst case scenario, gold back to the 1600s. That's if we model after a crazy situation, but also something from recent history. So what good does that do? Taking a huge drop from a decade ago and acting like that could happen again? Well, it gives us a really bad scenario, maybe even a feasible worst case scenario. Now, what would you do if we experienced that today, or actually 3 years out? Well, if you're me, you'd take advantage of it to whatever extent you could, and you'd buy. Now, the next interesting part here, maybe the more interesting part yet, is what came next. So from the lows of 2015 to what's happening today, back above 2,500, we are seeing gold climb 240%. Bring that forward, we would see 1654, the 1600s worst case scenario I just talked about, from February 2029, this made-up crash we're modeling from historical precedent. We'd see it run all the way to $3,970 by September of 2038. That's if the next 14 years look like the 14 years it started at the beginning of 2011. If we're going to zoom in on spikes and dips, we need to remember this is volatility. If we play it right, we can actually benefit from it, but we can't extrapolate a short-term event and just assume that's the continued direction. So I just showed what it would look like if we saw a crazy spike and a huge crash like we saw in 2011 and 2015, and then just let it play out for the next 9 years. The story was not a huge spike. It wasn't a huge crash. The story was actually 10% annual appreciation with some good times to buy. And if we did the more sophisticated math, we'd see it was actually even better than that because we had a longer period of time with lower prices to be buying on. So if we were averaging our costs on a monthly purchase schedule, we'd be up even more. So how's that for a worst case scenario? Did I ruin it for you? So let's call it good there. Big news from Jackson Hole Conference today with Jerome Powell finally saying the time has come for policy to adjust. Now, it's one of the least surprising statements he could have made, but it's interesting that we're finally here. So if you're hoping for a big drop in price today, well, you're not getting it. But let us know what you think. Are you buying? And I'm also curious what you think of possible spikes and crashes like the ones I mentioned. Do you think any of that's feasible? Let us know. And then while you're in the comments, be sure to hit that like button if you found any of this interesting. Be sure you're subscribed with notifications turned on if you want to hear more on the topic. And if you're still here, thanks again for watching. I always appreciate your time. Take care.